The Toronto Raptors are coming off of an offseason where they did not make a single trade, despite the fact that it's pretty clear that this team is not quite ready to contend just yet. And yesterday's loss to the Dallas Mavericks showcased that maybe a piece or two is really missing from this team. So in this video, we're going to discuss what Masai Ujiri is really planning for this franchise going forward and how he wants to make them contenders in the next few years. Let's get into it. What's going on, NBA and Raptors fans? It's Jacob here, back with Amateur Sports, your source for the greatest coverage and analysis on the latest Toronto Raptors news. If you like what you see from today's video, then make sure you are subscribed to the channel. You can help me on the road to 13,000 subs, and in return, you get 3 or 4 videos a week all about the Raptors and a live watch party for every single Raptors game. On top of that, if you find yourself enjoying this video, make sure you drop a like to get that extra bit of support. Let's shoot for 200 likes on today's video. And in the video, we're going to be discussing the Raptors, and we're going back to the offseason where not a single trade was made by Masai Ujiri and the Raptors front office here. The Raptors have started the season quite admirably. They're 5-4 already, and they've had a pretty difficult start to the season as far as the strength of schedule is concerned. They've looked really good. Sure, there's been some bad games, but for the most part, their offense has looked really good. Their defense has looked really good. That's led to a really strong net rating across the NBA. So things are looking up for this team. Now, one area of concern, very much in the short term, I don't have any information regarding the scale of Pascal Siakam's injury that he picked up yesterday. Hopefully, it's just a few games out. I mean, even more hopefully he doesn't miss any time, but there is the Pascal Siakam injury to worry about. He's looking like an MVP candidate earlier on in the season. But the Raptors 5-4, even though they are playing impressively and they are, pretty high up in the Eastern Conference as far as the standings are concerned very early on in the season, it's quite clear that when you watch this team that they're not quite ready to be a contender yet. And it's also quite clear, and especially from the game yesterday, that this team is missing a piece or two. Now, obviously, Fred VanVleet was injured, and he wasn't playing against the Dallas Mavericks yesterday. In the 3 games without Fred VanVleet, we won by 30, won by 43, and yesterday we did end up losing just by 1 after a near miracle comeback in the fourth quarter. But as far as even with Fred VanVleet being back in this team, there's obviously some issues with this team. I've sounded off in the past about how the bench still is not good enough to help out such a competitive starting lineup. The Raptors with so many good players in their starting 5. Achua has been a loose cannon this season and super inconsistent. Boucher is offering some great energy. He's been good, and he always does offer quite a bit on the court. The scoring part of his game isn't as consistent, but I've been pretty happy with him this season. Otto Porter Jr. is coming back from injury and is looking like the floor spacers that we really needed to come off the bench. And other than that, Thaddeus Young is really struggling to get any sort of play time. And in the ball handling department, especially when guys like Fred VanVleet are injured, we just don't really have anybody to rely on, because Delano Banton, who did play yesterday, just didn't look good. I think he was on the court for one of the worst stretches of the games. Granted, it wasn't a great lineup for him, but Delano Banton, when he's in the G League and he gets the ball in his hands all the time, and he's one of the better players, he looks like he's unstoppable when he's playing with the Raptors 9-5, at least last season. The way he can slash the rim, it's super, super difficult to guard. That mixed in with a somewhat consistent mid-range game and an okay three-point game makes him a really good prospect. But when it comes to the NBA, he's just not good enough to consistently get the ball in his hands. His decision-making just isn't quite good enough. He's not a good enough passer. He's not a good enough ball handler. And beyond his ball handling, he doesn't really offer much to an NBA team. So he's not really doing much, and he's not that good of a defender. Now, earlier in the offseason, I spoke about how he needs an opportunity with this team to start the season. Well, he got the opportunity, hasn't really taken it. As far as Malachi Flynn, another guy who we can rely on to be a ball handler off the bench, so far this season, he has been an absolute wreck on defense. He's been horrible, getting blown by far too easily, doesn't know what he's doing when he's off ball, and for that reason, you can't really play him, because offensively, he doesn't really offer you anything either. So there really is a definitive lack of ball handling and dribble penetration from this team when guys like, Siakam and Barnes aren't on the floor, and of course, with Fred VanVleet being injured. Even when everybody is healthy on this team, there still are many situations where the bench just lets down the starting unit. We go to even the games we won by 30 and 43. That Hawks game, we started up by 10. The bench came in, and they put us in a deficit. And then we didn't really use the bench for the rest of the game, won by 30. Same exact thing happened against the San Antonio Spurs, except this time we won by 43 points, and we were in such a good position late in the game that we could use the bench, and it didn't really matter what happened there. So what I'm trying to say is this team is evidently missing some pieces with its bench. This team is also evidently missing that really top-tier sort of talent that can break open a game like that game we saw yesterday against the Dallas Mavericks, where maybe the half-court offense for the first 3 quarters just didn't quite look very good. So in the offseason, there were discussions, big discussions, and tons of videos from me regarding Kevin Durant and his trade status. And the way the Brooklyn Nets have started this season, there are question marks coming up about if he's going to request another trade away from the Brooklyn Nets. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been another MVP sort of caliber player to start the season, but the Thunder continue to be a horrible team. Is he eventually going to want out? And these are 2 players that Raptors fans are consistently eyeing in these sort of trade situations. And you're looking at the Raptors team, like I said. It's a good team. It's not one of those excellent sort of contender teams, and it's just missing some pieces. It feels like we are missing an extra ball handler and creator coming off of our bench. And a good point that was made online that I saw was, watching Spencer Dinwiddie play. Is that not like the perfect fit for the Raptors to have as their 6th man, a shot creator and ball handler come off their bench? And it really did resonate with me that if somebody like that becomes available, that should definitely be a player the Raptors look to get. And Jordan Clarkson, currently on the Utah Jazz, he's been playing well so far this season, but I don't know what sort of aspirations the Jazz have to win despite how well they're playing so far this season. He's a player that could easily become available at some point over the course of the season. So with the Raptors not making a trade in the offseason, what was the plan by Masai Ujiri in those situations? Because we're not ready to contend. And I've spoken about this a number of times in this channel, so I'll only touch on it briefly here, but we don't need to rush anything here. It's very difficult to get one of those high-tier players on your team, and if you are going to lose a bunch of your assets to bring in a player of a high caliber, you want that player to be good enough to put you over the top. So I've had discussions online, I'll call them discussions, putting it nicely, about the Raptors and why they did not trade for Donovan Mitchell in the offseason. Now, my point on Donovan Mitchell remains the same here. I did not want to make that trade for Donovan Mitchell. Now, we're looking how good the Cavs look this season, how well Donovan Mitchell has been playing. But I don't think Donovan Mitchell puts the Raptors over the top if we were to have traded 3 first-round picks for him. I don't think he puts us in that elite contender status. So you really want to hold on to those assets for when that player becomes available. Now, Kevin Durant is a player who I believe puts you over the top, but with the age concerns and the player concerns, the injury concerns, I didn't want to give up Pascal Siakam or Scotty Barnes. They wanted Scotty Barnes, and we have to recognize that wasn't going to happen. The Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's thing is still a bit of a pipe dream here. Let's be honest. I don't think it's impossible down the line, but still a little bit of a pipe dream here. It's not easy to just go and trade for a superstar. This is not NBA 2K GM mode here. You can't just go to a team with a really good player and figure out a deal. Most of these teams just don't want to make a deal. They don't want to trade those players under any circumstances whatsoever. So you have to wait until one becomes available. And if, a guy like Donovan Mitchell is available, but the asking price maybe is just a little bit too high, and I believe it was, you hold what you have. And the Raptors are going to hold their chips because they've got a lot of tradable contracts here. They've got all of their draft picks available to trade. So inevitably, the Raptors are going to strike at some point and make one of these huge trades. I've continued to talk about this, but I just don't think it's going to happen this season. The Eastern Conference is loaded. The Western Conference is also loaded. The parity in the league might be unlike anything we have ever had in the history of the league. 76 years here. The parity is incredible right now. This would be probably the worst time to go out and make a huge trade because you look at the Atlanta Hawks, who made a huge trade to bring in DeJounte Murray. They might not even be able to avoid the play-in tournament this season. So the Raptors, a very competitive team, and they are probably going to have a very competitive season where they make the playoffs, but aren't able to go past the first or the second round. I recognize that. Maybe that's not something that you want to see as a fan. But these championships, these contender teams, they don't happen overnight. Like, look at the Raptors in their 2019 championship. That was the product of 6 to 7 years of consecutive success of building and building and building. And when the right player Kawhi Leonard became available, we had the assets to get that trade done. That was the trade that put us over the top. We're probably going to be looking to mimic that in the next few years to find that player. It's not going to be like a 10-year process here, but it might be a 2 or 3 year process before we really bring in the player that reshapes the dynamic of this team. But we still have a competitive team for this season, and we're not just going to roll over and tank this season. Really working on the franchise, working on the individual players allows all of them to grow as individuals and grow as a team. So you're going to get Scotty Barnes hopefully progressing with the development. Siakam has very seemingly taken another leap this season. Hopefully we get a little bit more consistency out of Gary Trent. OG is looking really good to start the season. So all of these players continuing to develop, I think it's worth it and fair to those guys to supplement them with a better player coming off of our bench. Our starting 5 is looking really good. Not as much yesterday, but it has been looking good this season. A player like Jordan Clarkson or, like what we saw from Spencer Dinwiddie yesterday would be a great asset to bring into your team. You have tradable contracts. Thad is making $8 million. Kem Birch is making $6 million. Those are players you can trade for salary purposes. And also, on top of that, you can give away a first-round pick because you've got all of your draft capital available. You can afford to lose one of those, picks in the 20 to 30 range, it would seem, for the Raptors. You can afford to lose one of those picks in order to bring in, I think, a player that really helps your team this season with an important aspect that, with the bench that has struggled so far this season and was such a problem last season. But I don't think there's any sense of rushing into the big trade. The Raptors are staying patient. That's why they didn't make a trade in the offseason. It's not like they weren't active in these discussions. They tried to make that big trade for Kevin Durant. It ultimately did not materialize. It's going to take some time for Masai Ujiri to find the right trade, but this season, I think it'll be very worthwhile to find the right piece to supplement what we already have here. And as far as ascending to that contender status at some point in the future, I think that's coming in the very near future. We just got to wait for the right piece for this team. I have a lot of faith in this core and our front office. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like to give the extra support to the channel, and make sure you're subscribed to MHR Sports for the greatest coverage and analysis on the latest Toronto Raptors news. Help me on my road to 13,000 subs, and I'll see you again tomorrow for our watch party for the Raptors against the Chicago Bulls.